Anything come up for anybody in meditation that they're curious about or want to talk about before we go into our list?
Having a hard time staying awake.
Having a hard time staying awake. A classic.
Right?
Yeah. How do you work with that?
Usually I open my eyes more and sometimes I'll stand up. But yeah, no, there's nothing, it's weird. It's not that I felt exceptionally tired for any reason. It was just as soon as we started sitting, I was like,
It sounds like you didn't open your eyes or didn't stand up. I'm curious what prevented you from opening your eyes or standing up.
I think I was lying to myself a little. Like I'd open them a little and be like, yeah, there we go. And then they were just,
Yeah. Kind of like sleepiness. Right? It's pleasant. It's super pleasant. End of the week. Right? It's just like, I can just like...
That's exactly it.
Yeah.
Just, there's such an ease to it.
It is. It's sort of like quasi-meditative. It's I'm practicing, but it's also that pleasantness. Yeah, that craving for pleasure, that leaning into it, really can stand in the way of the present moment. Right? Just want to rest. I think it takes a lot of bravery for me to admit to myself, like, I actually need to open my eyes. Like, I need to stand up. Like, I'm like, no, I'm not dealing with sleepiness.
I'm too
right.
butch.
Yeah.
I'm too what? Too butch.
Yeah. Or I'm too spiritual, right? Like, spiritual people don't fall asleep.
Yeah.
Right? It's don't want anyone to know. Try being on the video, and I'm just like, oh yeah. If I move or open my eyes, they're gonna know. They're gonna know that I'm not spiritual. Shit. Right? There goes my shot at being a guru. Son of a bitch. Yeah, so I think acknowledging that I'm sleepy and that sleepiness is a hindrance that arises and that it's a very normal one. We're lay people. We've been working all week. It's Friday night. I just had a big bowl of noodle soup. Right? Like, you're sleepy. It's okay. I think that's part of the generosity of really just like acknowledging, like, what's actually present. Oh, I'm sleepy. And that's okay. Maybe even allowing myself to drift off a little bit sometimes. What would that be like to just go, you know what, tonight I'm actually going to allow myself that rest? Or what happens if I go, oh yeah, I'm sleepy. Okay, I'm going to open my eyes. I don't want to. And acknowledge that, like, I don't want to. I don't want to say, because if I stand up, then everybody's going to know that I was falling asleep. Right? Like, it's not going to be, it's not going to be a secret anymore. Right? Then they're going to know I'm not spiritual. Yeah. Thank you for your honesty about that.
I thought the snoring might have given me away anyway.
And I don't know if there's ever really, except for maybe on retreat, like, is there any sit where I don't experience some amount of sleepiness in the middle of lay life? I don't know. Like, usually there's some point like, oh, wow, there's some sleepiness present. Right? If there's nothing else, my nervous system is having the opportunity to just like, yeah. So maybe that's okay too. Just allow some of that softening, and maybe I need a little bit of that. Maybe that's okay. Hello, Melissa. So, yeah, thank you. My favorite is when you're on retreat and there's like some guy at the end of the sit who's like, he's sleeping, but he's like down here, right? The posture's just gone till he's just like down and sleeping. Or the sit after lunch, right? After lunch, and like half the room is standing up because everybody just like ate way too much, right? And you're like, oh yeah, that after lunch sit, that one's rough, right? You just want to take a nap. Mm-hmm. Yeah. The lay life is hard. It's hard to bring practice into everyday life. We're exhausted. We have kids, we have jobs, we have so much to think about. Am I going to have enough money to pay the rent? And there's a lot. It's not easy. It's not easy at all. Maybe there's health problems, maybe somebody in our family. Like for me, I was like noticing like my family was really on my mind tonight. It just kept coming up like, oh, so much, right? So that's one of the questions that I'm really curious about for our group, for my practice. So what does that mean to be a lay person? How, as a lay person, do I engage with practice in the middle of my lay life? Because if I'm honest, the monastic overlay that has been sort of the model that has been brought over from Thailand and Burma, the retreat model, while lovely and helpful and really beneficial, is not terribly accessible for many of us, right? We were talking before class. If I just have 2 weeks of vacation a year, if I'm lucky enough to have 2 weeks of vacation, isn't that sad? If I'm lucky enough to have 2 weeks of vacation a year, I have to tell my family, in my case, my family's split, so I've got 2 families plus a local family. So I've got to tell my wife and my parents and my siblings and my nieces and nephews, right, I can't come see you because I'm going to take 10 days of my 14 days of vacation to go sit silently by myself. It almost feels selfish, right? And then I have 4 days left. My wife loves that. Right? I have 4 days left where we can take some time. Yeah, thanks. Right? I don't know if that's a sustainable model for lay people, right? Unless you have a lot of money, or you're super young, or you're retired, right? Or you make a lot of sacrifices, or you're just a single Dharma person and you're like, yeah, I can just do whatever I want, right? Like you're free spirit. I mean, that's awesome if your life is set up in that way. And if you set up your life to practice Dharma, I think that's beautiful. But not everyone has that. So I'm really curious, how do lay people practice? In countries where Buddhism is the practice, how do lay people practice? And so we can look to the suttas, because the beautiful thing about the teachings of the Buddha of the suttas is that he taught different things to different people depending on where they were. He taught very differently, right? This person taught very differently to monastics than he did to lay people. And he taught very differently to people who had an established practice than to people who were new to practice. And he definitely taught differently to kings than he did to his followers, his other monastics. I mean, that becomes really clear. And there isn't necessarily the same commentarial tradition in the suttas that there are maybe with the say like the Bible, right? Where there's a lot of knowledge around who he was talking to when and who it was and what was the purpose and all that sort of background. I mean, the suttas have really only been translated into English in fairly recent history. So we're only now sort of like, and they were transmitted for 2,500 plus years, mostly for monastics. So I have to think also when they were picking and choosing which teachings we're going to choose, probably I think male monastics got probably the majority of the teaching. So we kind of got to really dig down for, this was a lay person who had an established practice. What did he tell her? Right? Here's this lay woman coming to the Buddha and saying, how should I practice? Tonight's sutta, that's really what happens. This lay woman's like, okay, how do I practice deeply as a lay person? She's not a nun. Right? I have to imagine if she's not a nun that she is either married or has children or some sort of family responsibilities, which would have been common at the time. Right? But she's a follower of the Buddha. She's got enough status in that community that she can go to the Buddha, not like some underling, right? But directly to the Buddha and say, how should I practice? Right? So this is somebody with a dedicated practice. Lisa has a question. Sort of Frederick, actually. In the suttas, how many lay people achieve enlightenment? Well, that's a good question. There are many lay people who become stream enterers. That is, that they're guaranteed within the next 7 lifetimes or less to achieve enlightenment. I don't know if there's any lay people in the suttas who achieve arhatship without becoming a monastic of some kind. I'll have to double check on that. That's a really good question. There are recent stories of people who have achieved arhatship in the modern era as lay people. So there are those stories. But that's a good question. I don't know the answer, and let me look into that. So I'm curious from this idea of, well, how did the Buddha teach to lay people? How did the Buddha of the suttas teach to lay people? And how do lay people practice in Buddhist countries? What is there another model? Right? If we look at the suttas, is there another model for deep lay practice? For practice that is still, it's more than just, lighting a candle at the Buddha altar, right? Is there something more than that? So these practices are done regularly in Southeast Asia, typically on sort of these full moon holidays, right? There are these different holidays throughout the Buddhist calendar, these sort of powerful days. They're called Uposatha days, or Uposatha. My Pali pronunciation, please forgive me. But these are days when lay people dedicate themselves to practice in a deeper way. And usually it begins with a monastic offering refuge, right? Taking refuge in the triple gem of Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, of and then taking the precepts, right? So this practice starts with the precepts, and this is one of the main ways in which lay people practice, right? Is that, and I've talked about this before, that this is a path of renunciation. It's actually means letting go of the things that are creating suffering. And there's 5 things, as we know, that say, if you give these up, right? You're giving up peril to yourself, personal peril, right? We can all agree that doing these 5 things, killing, stealing, cheating, lying, getting fucked up, like that puts you in peril, right? Those are pretty universal things as society. We go, yeah, those are dangerous things, right? You only get to do those things under very special circumstances, right? You only get the okay, and even then, it's still going to put you in peril. Like if you're in an army, right? And so we say people in an army, they get this sort of special dispensation. Thank you. Right? They get this special dispensation. It's okay. You're allowed to kill people. Right? So even if we have that permission, right? We're in danger. We're trying to protect our safety. Even if we accept that, and they do accept that, like in Thailand, that's actually considered an acceptable, noble profession to be in the army, right? That's considered an okay thing for a lay person to do. That there's still a cost. You're still at peril. I mean, we think about all these young men and women who are coming back from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Syria, severe PTSD. You don't get away with that. Like if you take someone's life, or if you see that, or if you're supported that, it impacts you. It puts you in peril. Right? Even if you have permission. And it still creates a moral cost. So we agree, right, these 5 things, although there might be reasons to do these things, and there are exceptions, right? Like you can take intoxicants if you don't get intoxicated. Like if you're taking cough syrup, which has a little bit of alcohol in it, because you've got a cough, so you can sleep and you can heal, that's allowed. Not in the amounts that I like to take. But if you take the recommended dosage, right? If you take the recommended dosage, even though it's got alcohol in it, that's allowed, right? Because you're not doing it to get intoxicated. Right? I would say, there's probably other things that we can think about that we can say, oh yeah. But universally we can sort of agree, but it puts you in peril. Like it's still really iffy. Because you might get that codeine from the dentist, right? And you're in pain. You're in pain. They gave you a prescription. You're taking it as needed. But you go, oh, I really like it. Maybe I could tell the dentist that I'm in a little bit more pain than I'm actually in. Right? You're still in peril, even if it's legitimate. Right? Right? Yeah, maybe if I told a little lie to this officer, I wouldn't get a ticket. My family needs the money right now, right? I really can't afford a ticket. Like it's for a good cause. It's to support my family, right? It's still very perilous, right? It's very slippery. But this is universally where the suttas do start for lay people. And I know I'm sort of a broken record about this, and I come back to it over and over again, but there is a practice of taking the 5 precepts as permanent practice. This Nicha Sila, right? This permanent practice of that. And so for me, this is a theme as I read the suttas. I mean, he just really, you think I hammer down the 5 precepts? Read the suttas, it's just like every other sutta. He's like, yeah, no, you can't do that. You really do need to abandon killing. And he says in this particular sutta, this Uposatha sutta, I sent out a version of it, that we also need to be conscientious for the good of all beings. These 5 precepts are really interesting. They're often kind of shorthanded as sort of thou shalt not kill, kind of, don't kill, don't steal, don't fuck around, don't get drunk, don't lie, that sort of thing. But But they also, and in this sutta it really kind of names it, it's also bringing mindfulness, awareness to my actions. This one says I have to be consciousness for the good of all beings. Right? So I'm not just laying down my weapons, but I'm laying down my weapons so that I can bring my energy of conscientiousness for the good of all beings. Right? So I'm not just removing peril, I'm also building what's called merit. Right? I'm building good, a store of good. Right? Like people that are nice to animals all the time, like animals like them a lot. Right? They feel that. They're like, oh, you're safe. I like you. Right? Like it's a felt sense that we as beings, like when somebody's dangerous, you feel it. You're like, dude, no, like danger, right? Like you're just like your whole system's like on alert, not safe, right? We feel that. It creates an energetic field around us. So these first 5, it really says we have to abandon these. Like this is like for our safety, right? We really have to abandon these. And the language is very clear in this sutta for these first 5. It actually says abandon these. Like just leave it by the, like something you abandon. Think about something you abandon. It is something you really, really don't want. And you just like leave that wherever. Like put that by the side of the road, put that on the porch, put that on the curb, like one of those like sad couches you see in LA, right? That's just like someone's just like, yeah, don't need that, right? You're just like, yeah, that can just like anybody can just piss on that. I don't care what happens to it. Just don't care, right? We need to abandon these. And of course, we also abandon not taking what isn't freely given, right? Giving up greed. And it says in the sutta, a very interesting thing, that we're expecting to receive only what is given. I expect only to get what is actually given to me. So there's a sense of entitlement that I'm letting go of in this, right? This idea that I deserve something. That's tough, right? But that attitude puts me in peril. Right? If I deserve this, I deserve this, right? I deserve to drive an SUV with all the other soccer moms. Forget that driving cars is the number one cause of greenhouse emissions. Yeah, whatever. I don't care. I deserve that.
But what else do you deserve?
Right. I don't know. So I like this, expecting only what is given, right? It's this real sense of not looking for more than what I need. Like the part of this practice is also looking for a simplicity of what is it that I actually only need in my life? Do I actually really need this? Wow, there's a radical thought. Right? The third one, so important. We see this over and over again. The Me Too movement and all of the sexual scandals within Buddhist communities, right? Abandoning what's called unchaste conduct, right? Respecting other people's boundaries, right? We've really learned about consent in the society. There's a lot of discussion around consent, and also respecting our commitments that we've made. We were talking with the Red Cross guy today because we're trying to figure out how to contribute to a blood drive. It's our charity for December is going to be the American Red Cross, and we're going to do partner with some local organizations for a blood drive. And he was saying that the number one source of tainted blood in the blood supply, which usually means like HIV, tainted blood, is women whose husbands cheated on them and they don't know it.
Oh, it's really bad. It used to be really bad down in South America.
Yeah.
The guys had Saturday night out, and one of their big things is having sex with guys because it made them more butch. And then they bring back HIV to their wives. It used to be really bad
And then they don't tell their wives, of course, that they've done this, right? So, and I was just like, oh yeah, that's a thing, right? So we're really abandoning the harm that can, because we can see that in this deeper dive that I'm kind of beginning to point to, right? In these deeper periods of practice, because this is the other thing that the Buddha points to, right? Is if we're going to do deeper periods of practice on these full moon and new moon periods, that we actually, for those periods, we actually abandon all sexual activity. And this is where we start looking at refraining rather than abandoning, right? In this sutta, it's very clear, like the 5 basic precepts, right? Which in this case would be like honoring your commitments, honoring consent, right? Wise sexuality. You abandon unwise sexuality, right? You're like, no, I don't do that. But we choose to refrain from sexual activity. So it's saying there's no, like, if you have sexual activity, it's saying that's not bad, right? It's not going to put you in peril to have sexual activity if it's wise sexual activity. But for this deeper dive, for this period, whatever we choose this period to be, whether it's on a retreat or for this like sort of 24-hour full moon period, or if it's for, some other practice, right? We're wanting to deepen our practice. It's saying that we actually need to refrain from sexuality entirely, including masturbation. Right? So any form of sexual activity, right, for this period. So that's a little bit different between the 8 precepts and the 5 precepts. If you're practicing just like daily life, 5 precepts, like I can totally have sex with my wife. Like it's awesome, right? That's a good thing, right? But I can't have sex with people that aren't my wife, right? Because that's the commitment that I've made, right? If I was practicing one of these deeper periods, I would refrain from that. Like when I go on retreat, I don't have any sex at all, and I refrain from it entirely. And it's not that sex is bad, it's just I'm doing this like deeper practice. Is that clear? Mm-hmm. Make sense? Okay. Right? And what it says in the sutta is that we refrain from the common way. I love that phrasing, right? Like I'm taking a break from sort of everyday, like I'm actually stepping into, I'm enrobing, I'm ennobling myself. When I do this practice, right, what I'm actually doing is I'm stepping into sort of this ennobled life. I'm actually taking on the same 8 precepts that a novice monk or nun would take. That I'm taking precepts from a monk that I'm, or it could be a lay person, or it even could be myself, but I'm taking that sort of formal practice on. So I think this is really important. It's not just going on retreat. It's not just taking the time, but it's taking on this formal element of practice, right? I'm friends with this man who is a Navy chaplain, Buddhist Navy chaplain. Arun is a wonderful man, and Arun was a monk, right? He was a Thai monastic, and you can't be a monastic and be in the military. It's against the monastic principles in his tradition. Not in every tradition, but in his tradition. And so he had to derobe in order to become a chaplain, right? Because he wears the military uniform. And I asked him about that. I was like, well, because he'll probably take robes again when he's done, because in the Thai tradition you can actually disrobe and re-robe up to like 7 or 8 times. Right? You can sort of do this thing. A lot of young men will take robes for a short period of time because it brings great merit, and then they'll go back into lay life. They might do this a couple of times at different points in their life. And you can actually go to some countries like Thailand and actually take a temporary ordination. You can take a year-long or 6-month-long ordination. You can take precepts. Okay? And I asked him, I said, well, isn't that uncomfortable? Like you were a monastic? And he goes, I wear my robes in here. And I was like, oh, that's so beautiful. So I love this idea of wearing the robes of practice in my heart, taking on these 5 precepts as like really deep practice, because I don't want the common way of the world. That these things bring me great stability in my life. I'm not only giving up peril, I'm inviting stability into my life. That's really important right now. Like this, just, if you read the news, you see the world is not stable. It is not stable. It's very tumultuous, right? In this sutta it says, miserable is kingship over men, right? It is miserable to be the king, right? The ways of the world, like trying to sort of maintain control over the world, is miserable compared with heavenly bliss. And then it goes on, it says, if you practice these things, basically like, it's all these metaphors that you're going to like experience this like stable, sort of more heavenly bliss. And I like this idea that inviting these into my life creates stability. So it's refraining. When I'm talking about refraining versus abandoning, right? Everyone should abandon these 5 like basic things. Like those are going to cause you peril. But when I refrain, what I'm refraining from is the common way, the way of the world. And I'm inviting in this sort of, he calls it heavenly bliss, and really I read that as stability. I can count upon my own actions and the repercussions that invites in my life. But those are reliable things. We abandon false speech, right? Lying, super perilous, right? Super perilous. We become speakers of the truth. It says joiners of the truth. I love that, joining with the truth. We abandon intoxicants, which lead to carelessness. So we embrace the development of carefulness. I'm trying to invite some carefulness into my life. There's so many ways to get intoxicated, so many different ways to invite carelessness into my life. And these next 3 of these 8 are really about refraining from carelessness. They're about setting down those things which really develop carelessness. They're forms of intoxication. They're more subtle forms of intoxication. And so I'm really interested in doing these, right? Like if you go on retreat, you might want to play with these, right? These extra 3, right? So we're pretty familiar with the 5. And if you're not, I encourage you to take these practices on as a daily practice and to really invite those in, because over and over again, the Buddha is saying, like, if you're a layperson, this is your practice, these 5 precepts. These are your practice. Right? This is the ground of practice. The nice thing about practicing those 5, they invite you into mindfulness. So these extra 3 invite me even more deeply into mindfulness. They enrobe me and they ennoble me. And they seem a little harsh if you don't put them in that context. Like if I sent them out just as a list of 8, and they're like, that seems really harsh. Like, no sex at all? Like, that's terrible, right? But you have to put them in context. Like, when is this practice invited? The Buddha isn't saying to lay people, like, you're married. He just says, don't have sex. Like, that's going to he actually says, like, that's a duty, right? If you're married, like, that's part of your duty. That's why you can't be a monk and be married, because it's part of your duty, right? Like, he's not going to tell lay people not to get laid, right? But he's going to say, hey, if you're taking it's important that we step aside from the world, from the common way at times, that we find a way to set aside a different time, to enrobe ourselves, right? To bring forth happiness, these divine abodes, to develop our body and speech, to invite in carefulness more deeply. So he adds an extra 3. Number 6, he says, is to refrain from eating outside the time, which is afternoon. Right? So you're doing this deeper practice, just like a monastic, you would only eat in the morning. You might eat twice, like you might have breakfast and a big lunch, but you refrain from eating in the evening or in the afternoon. Right? And there's many traditions that invite fasting in for contemplation. Right? This is a common practice. There's something about just giving the fuel to the body that it needs, just enough, right? Without gluttony, right? It's inviting in sort of temperance or moderation. This idea of we spend so much carelessness like around food and going out to eat and all the sort of indulgences that brings, especially with this sort of current foodie culture, right? It's really a way to, where are we going to go? What new restaurant are we going to go to? What exotic food are we going to try? How are we going to put it on Instagram, right? How am I going to TikTok me watching, eating a meal? If you're over 30, you have no idea what I just said. So, and for me, I think this is actually an important part of practice, is thinking about, like, why am I eating? Right? Even when I'm not doing this deeper practice, like, am I eating for the health of my body? Am I eating just because I'm craving pleasure, right? Like, why am I consuming? What am I consuming? Very famous Buddhist monastic, the patriarch of Cambodian Zen, said, Buddhism is eating. First issue of Tricycle magazine. What we take in. We're really looking at what is it that we take in. What do we allow into our body, into our awareness? What do I choose to take in? So this really gives me, because if I've got an afternoon and there's no meals planned, like, what am I going to do with myself? Frees up a lot of time to practice and to contemplate Dharma and to think more deeply, right? Number 7, this one I think many of us have problems with. We refrain from entertainments and beautifying ourselves, right? So no singing, no dancing, no listening to music. What? And no cosmetics, no jewelry, no like embellishments. Right? So a lot of people who take these Uposatha vows will wear all white. Right? So they'll wear like sort of practice clothing. They won't wear any jewelry. They don't put any makeup on. Right? They won't listen to the radio. They don't turn on television. They're really sort of setting aside vanity and excitement and inviting in that sort of humility and ease. Right? How often do I reach for the TV remote when I'm feeling uncomfortable? Or for the phone, right? For the mindless app. Or do I just turn on the radio because I can't be with myself in my car? Or how many places do we go into now and it seems like there's a TV everywhere you go now. There's always a TV. Like, we can't be without a TV on at all times. The last one is refraining from what's called soft beds or large beds. Right? So you have to refrain. Again, it's not abandoning, it's refraining from soft beds or large beds. What does that mean? In a practical sense, if you're doing this practice, like, you're just sleeping to just sort of fulfill the needs of the body, and then you're practicing again. You're trying to bring some energy for practice. if you're sleeping on a yoga mat, you're probably not going to sleep in real late. Your body's going to sleep what it needs to, and then it's going to wake you up. It's be like, yeah, dude, all right, it's time to get up now, right? So on a very practical level, right, if the bed is like one of those super comfortable, smart mattresses, and you're just like, nah, it's like a rainy morning, you get the comforter, you're like, this is good, right? So, and if you ever go on a retreat, like usually you get up early in the morning, and this is reminiscent of that, right? Like, yeah, we don't sleep in, like we get up and we practice, right? We're bringing that sort of weight, and it's hard for the first couple of days, and usually teachers will give you allowance for the first couple of days. You're like, sleep in, get used to it, and then get your ass up early after that. And it actually becomes easier as you practice, right? It becomes easier to get up. It's not as difficult. The other thing, though, is the large beds. And the large beds means it's just single beds. In other words, you're not sleeping with somebody else in the bed. Right? Because if you're sleeping with somebody else in the bed, it's easy to break that third precept. Right? So you're also taking some time sort of away from that sort of comfort of having the other body in the bed, if that's something that you have. Right? It's saying no, you're actually sort of coming into that. But it's really, I think, it's inviting in effort to my practice. How do I let go of slothfulness, and how do I invite in practice? A lot of people will say, oh, I don't have time to practice, right? I don't have any time to meditate. And it's like, well, what time do you get up in the morning? Right? What time do you get up in the morning? Maybe you could get up half an hour earlier and sit for 45 minutes in the morning. Got time for that. So I think, and again, this is not saying like, hey, you're a bad person if you don't refrain from these things, right? Like if you sleep in, right? If you eat dinner, if you go see a concert, if you sleep with your wife, it's not that you're a bad person, right? Those are fine things. Those are worldly things. Those are common things. If we're interested in taking a deeper dive, which I think is what the Buddha is calling lay people to. He's saying, hey, I get it, you're lay people, you've got responsibilities, right? And somebody's got to feed the monks. Truth. Somebody's got to feed the monks. Somebody's got to work the fields. But still there's this invitation of how do we invite deeper practice in? And I think that was the genuine hope of people who brought sort of insight retreat practice, and it's like, oh yeah, this would be accessible to people. But a lot of those people were rich white kids who could afford to go off and join the Peace Corps and take a year out of their life to go to Burma or Sri Lanka or wherever and do practice. What a privilege. And I'm so grateful for their privilege because they brought something back that was so valuable to us. And I've gone on retreats and I find it a very valuable practice, but it's just not available to everyone. And maybe there's some years where it's really available, and then there's other years where you're just like, there's no way. There's no way. My son is sick. My mother is dying of cancer. I'm in debt and I need to work. Shit happens. But maybe could I take a Friday night through a Saturday night once every 2 months on these full moon holidays and dive a little bit more deeply to take these 8 practices, and how would they then begin to weave into my life? How would my conscientiousness for the good of all beings, how would that evolve? Would that create some space in my life that might actually allow me to meet the challenges of my life as a lay person? Because lay people do have unique challenges. Monastics have their own challenges, don't get me wrong. Monastics are people and they definitely have their own challenges, and it's like, but we're not monastics. And so I do wonder about this pressure to be a good Buddhist and to have this, pressure to go on these retreats, which cost a lot of money, and they do have an impact on our families. if we couldn't also invite in the idea of doing regular, deeper practice that's still accessible to us. And so I like that in the suttas, there is this model that's there too. We don't have to just look to monastics. We can involve the monastics, like, hey, if you have the opportunity to do one of these deeper practices, and you can go to a monastic and you can take refuge and you can take the 8 precepts formally and you can invite them in and really do this deeper practice, how beautiful is that? How wonderful is that? And I would totally, I was actually getting ready to do these weekend retreats, these non-residential retreats at Against the Stream just before it closed. And I wouldn't mind doing that again, right? Inviting that practice in. I think it would be really interesting to do. It says in the sutta, if you do this even once, if you practice these Uposatha vows for even one day, you're guaranteed rebirth in heaven. And I figure, well, why not? That sounds like, hey, what if that's true? What if that's actually true? You know, but the metaphor, I think, is really like, if I'm even willing to take a little bit of time out of my life to dive a little more deeply, what does that invite in? Does that invite in a little bit more peace? If refraining from a few things can bring in some peace to me, that might be worth exploring. And it feels a little more accessible. Yeah, it's still hard. That's still practice, and it's still difficult, and it's still still tough to find space for that. But I think if we were willing to do that, I think it would just be interesting to see what would it be like to enrobe our hearts. So these are the 8 practices for great advantage that bring forth the merits of happiness, blamelessness, and allow us to obtain the heavenly abodes, whatever that means for you. Who knows, maybe it means like actual heavenly abodes, I don't know. But it does feel a little bit more accessible to me, and that's why this is one of my favorite lists. I'm like, I could probably do that. I don't know about ordaining as a monk. Maybe lay people can only achieve enlightenment if they end up ordaining. I don't know. Maybe that's true. But maybe I could invite just a little bit more ease into my life, and in a way that's accessible, that actually does bring ease into my life, that doesn't cause harm to my family, that allows me to practice in a way that is very accessible. And I think it's important to think creatively in new ways. To think about how to do this. I think it's important. So that's my talk on the 8 practices for great advantage. I've got a minute or so, a couple minutes. If anybody has any questions online or in the room. Yeah, Roger.
How much of our practice as lay people can be achieved by simply paying attention? It's like, for instance, if writing is an incredible experience, if you listen and you feel.
Sure.
Or simply walking down the street, and is that one of the ways that we can actually deepen our practices, to know what we're doing and not have like when you're walking there, you can feel your feet, you can feel the wind, you can listen to the cars and be in the moment.
Oh yeah, I absolutely. So the question is this idea, like, isn't that what we're trying to do? Is just bring more mindfulness into our lives? And if we just did that, wouldn't that be enough? And for sure.
Yeah.
But how do we do that?
With great difficulty.
With great difficulty, right? It's actually, you try this, and it's actually much harder than you think it is, right? You're like, oh, damn, that was tough. Like I was fully going out for a mindful walk and I just like worried about my taxes the whole time. Like, damn it. Right? So what I like about these practices, and I've talked about this before, is these practices incline me to mindfulness. When I take these on as intentional practices, I actually am inviting more of that mindfulness into my everyday life. That's one of the reasons why monastics take on all of these practices, because it requires them to be very mindful of all of their actions.
Space.
Yeah. And I'm not doing the things that will incline me to heedlessness. Right? Like, very hard to be mindful if I'm hitting up the wine bar first. Right? Or if I'm watching some porn. Or if I'm eating too much steak, right? Or lying to my family, or, torturing cats or something like that. Like, they're very hard to be, but when I do these things, I do think that's what I hear, this idea of heavenly abodes, is that I'm inviting in the peace of heaven, and the degree to which I practice these is the degree to which I achieve those heavenly abodes. Because what he says is, like, if you do a little bit of practice, you get to this one heaven, right? It's a pretty good heaven, but it's not as long. Then there's this other heaven that's even better, that you're there even longer, right? If you do this deeper practice. And basically his point is, like, the more you're able to engage with these practices, the deeper you're able to go, the more peace and I hear in that mindfulness that I'm inviting in. Right? I mean, we get hung up on this mythological language, which to me is very poetic and beautiful, but we take it literally because we're a scientific culture. We're like, oh, there's no such thing as heaven. You can't prove that, right? But to me, it's this beautiful, like, the degree to which I'm inviting in peace is really the degree to which I'm willing to maybe dive into practice. And I really want to emphasize that I think that practice is available to us as lay people. It is available to us as we walk down the street, if I'm inviting it in a very deep way. And I think that has to be daily, not just daily practice, but also this daily practice of taking in and inviting these precepts and to some degree. And at times, we've lost the rhythm of the year. There's a reason why ritual exists, why a yearly ritual calendar exists. We need, as human beings, we need that sacred rhythm that invites us into a space that is non-linear time. That this time is different. That's a good place to stop. Our charity this month is an organization that builds kits for the homeless, really wonderful kits, and I think with the cooling weather, it's good to do that. I put a link up to them. Also on Sunday morning, a friend of mine is hosting a party of putting together some kits. It's a slightly different organization, but does the same thing. They put together kits for the homeless. I'll put that information up on our Facebook page in case you're interested in doing some service this weekend and you'd like to help out. He would appreciate it, and he's an awesome guy. So that's our charity for the month. I don't know our charity for the month of November, but our charity for the month of December is going to be the American Red Cross, and we're actually going to be involved in helping a blood drive. We're thinking about doing the blood drive here at the acupuncture center, but it's too small. They came and looked at the site today. It's not going to work, but we are going to pair with another local blood drive the week before Christmas. It's like the local Y and the local Methodist church, and we're also going to get involved. And so I'll put some information up there. And I really would like everybody in the community to participate in some way. If you can give blood, great. You can give blood. If you're not eligible to give blood, and only 35% of the population is eligible to give blood. So if you're eligible to give blood, please come and give blood. It's important because it's a slow time of year. It's when donations drop, so they really need people to give. But you can also volunteer. We need people to give away water and cookies, and we need people to register, and we need people to be there. And it's going to be midweek too. It's on a Wednesday or a Thursday. I'll put the date up this week once I know what it is. But we need people to volunteer for that. So if you can, please do that. Also, I would encourage everybody in the month of December, if you're willing to do this and you're able to do this and you're also eligible to do this, to give platelets. And you can give platelets every 2 weeks. It's really, they're in dire need of platelets at this time. Platelets are really used extensively in treating cancer patients, and it will keep them alive. But platelets only last for 5 to 7 days, so they go through them very quickly. And only 2% of people give blood or blood products. So the need is very great. So I'm going to be continuing to plug donating blood and platelets or whatever you can, or just to volunteer if you can, because obviously the majority of people actually can't give blood. Okay, so if you can't, you're with the majority, and then it's totally understandable. So that's what we're doing for this month. Let's sit for another minute, set our intention before we go out. May this invitation to move more deeply into our practice as it is in our lives as they are be an offering to all beings in this life. May all beings find a way to invite the heavenly realms into their hearts. May all beings find a way to